Hello and welcome to Behind the Story. I'm Sebastian Gomes, an executive editor here at America Media and the host of our new podcast, Voting Catholic. So be sure to subscribe to that wherever you get podcasts. Now, the U.S. presidential election is just days away, and Catholics are a key voting bloc in determining who the next president will be. As in recent election years, the Catholic vote is expected to be split between parties, with polls currently giving former Vice President Joe Biden a slight edge among Catholic voters. So joining me today to discuss this is Dr. Teresa Collett. She's a professor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota, and formerly served on the Pontifical Council for the Family under Pope Benedict XVI and then Pope Francis. And she recently wrote an article in America called "President Trump Kept His Promises. That's Why, as a Catholic, I Want 4 More Years." And that's what we'll be discussing today. So welcome to Behind the Story, Teresa. It's good to have you.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for including me.
Now, before we get started, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos on the church and the 2020 election, and leave your comments below. Now, Teresa, let's jump right in. You laid out the arguments in your article, which viewers can find at americamagazine.org, but just give us the main points. What's the Catholic case for reelecting Donald Trump?
Well, first and foremost, religious liberty and protection of innocent human life from the moment of fertilization to natural death are key concerns. Religious liberty, because we have to be able to serve God and then serve man. Of course, the first great commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And we're seeing an increasing hostility to that. The Catholic Church is being denied the opportunity to provide the sort of care and comfort for wide swaths of people because of the sexual morality that the Church finds rooted in the Bible, as well as the long view of history. So religious liberty for many of us seems to be eroding as it comes to Catholics. I thought it was interesting that the senators this time, in interviewing Judge Barrett for her
The confirmation hearings of the Senate to recently confirmed Justice Barrett, yes.
That's exactly right. We didn't hear about how the dogma lives deeply within her this time because there was such an adverse reaction. But the idea that there'd be a religious test for holding public office seems real and threatening when you have judicial candidates being interrogated about the Knights of the Columbus. And then the pro-life issue, which of course the U.S. bishops and the Holy Father consistently have said is preeminent and foundational. It doesn't mean it's exclusive, but it does mean that it's of great import and should weigh a little heavier than other aspects of it. So those are the two main issues, but also in criminal justice. Trump got it done with the First Steps legislation in a way that the other candidate for president simply was unable to after years and years and years, notwithstanding his claim that he cares about the inequities in the criminal justice system. Trump has raised the economic status of minorities to a point that we don't even, while we've been recording that, is unparalleled. So when we talk about justice throughout society to the marginalized, I see him having a very poor public persona, but policies and programs that actually get the job done.
I know that there were people who would interpret those things differently from a different perspective. But I wanted to ask you, you focused on specific issues, but Catholic teaching is not limited to a set of particular issues, right? It's more about these broader principles. I mean, it is about particular issues, but they're all under these broader inclusive principles about the common good and solidarity and the dignity of everybody's life, especially the marginalized. So I'm just curious in focusing on the specific issues that you laid out in your article, how you arrived at those issues, understanding them as sort of most important, and how those broader principles like the common good actually factored into your understanding of those issues.
Well, I think the common good, though, has to be premised upon the scriptural mandate, again, to love the Lord our God. And so religious liberty is a part of the common good and foundational to the common good. And then love your neighbor as yourself. In my article, I respond and identify 7 or 8 issues, including immigration, that his policies and his actual actions comport with church teaching. So to the extent that people say you're a one-issue voter, To some extent, that's true, in that if I don't have the right to life, if I am killed before I even have the opportunity to exercise these other, what we call civil rights or political rights, then they're kind of irrelevant.
Hmm.
And so it does seem to me that the church is correct, that the right to life is the preeminent issue, and that religious liberty follows close behind it. We're called to serve our neighbor, but when you have adoption agencies and homeless shelters and the church's ability to participate in government programs that help victims of human trafficking excluded because of our religious beliefs, that's not a one issue voter.
Hmm. Teresa, you're a lawyer working in academia at a Catholic university. I can imagine that you have colleagues and friends who disagree with you strongly on what you're explaining to us now. I'm wondering what the reaction was in your circles to the article that you wrote, especially to fellow Catholics who you work with and know personally.
Well, part of the problem, of course, is with COVID. While we are teaching in person, which I am so grateful for and love, but we are also being asked to leave campus as soon as we fulfill our responsibilities. So those opportunities for sort of casual dialogue, interaction are limited. I did have a colleague, however, who, when we had gathered for a meal, properly socially distanced outside, but when we had gathered for a meal, explained to me, notwithstanding my views, that she thought every university would be better off if there were no Trump supporters.
Hmm.
And, this particular colleague is one who is held out as very active in the church and representing the church's views. And I've got to say, I have done some writing in the area, and the demography of the American Legal Academy, law professors are so predominantly politically liberal, including at Catholic universities, that, as one of the leading demographers in the area said to me after presenting his studies, you don't exist demographically as a politically conservative evangelical Catholic woman. You are more rare than a Black woman or a Black man or a Mexican woman. And so this has been where God has placed me for almost 20 years, and I have accepted that I'm a unicorn, and that's okay. Painful sometimes, like when my colleague said that, but okay.
Now, Teresa, the most basic and fundamental Catholic teaching on voting is that the decision has to be left to the conscience of the individual believer. And that means obviously reflecting on church teachings, weighing the issues, looking at what's at stake, and then making a decision in good conscience. And in doing that, it's acceptable that some Catholics are going to vote one way, and others will vote a different way. But I'm thinking about this year in particular, and it's like there's this extreme attitude that's prevailed where some Catholics are saying, because I'm Catholic, I'm voting for Trump. And if anybody is voting for Biden, they're not a real Catholic. Or vice versa. I'm a Catholic and I must vote for Biden. And anybody who votes for Trump is not a real Catholic. I'm just wondering what you make of that, of the current state of the conversation around the election today.
Well, it's clear that the American public is becoming increasingly polarized. I think it's a myth that started 4 years ago. In fact, I know how disenfranchised I felt by the policies of the past administration on um, bathrooms in public schools and participation in sporting events. And when the Supreme Court usurped the question of how we legally define marriage, when the former president took the position he did that abortion was a human right. I take students to the United Nations once a year, and the past administration was very clear that there was a right to contraception, there was a right to abortion. These were all human rights. So people have been feeling alienated for, I would say, probably 16 years, at least. But that doesn't excuse our respect for each other's good faith prudential choices. And so I agree with, for example, John Carr, who is one of the other articles in your in America Magazine, when he says that what we're required to do is to actually inform ourselves and enter into dialogue with others whose views we respect and come to our own judgment.
One of the things I learned in doing the Voting Catholic podcast that I mentioned at the top is that for people who are voting, it's a real struggle. You know, if you take your responsibility to vote seriously, and this is exactly what you're talking about, it can be a struggle. You need to weigh all these things. It's complicated. Sometimes it's unsettling. Sometimes, you know, you feel, even though your conscience is telling you this is what I have to do, it can be very difficult to stomach in some cases. And I'm wondering, because when we see some, you know, very vocal Catholics in their support for Donald Trump, let's say, it seems to be a very enthusiastic support without that sense of like nuance or discomfort with some of the things that are not there. I'm just wondering, like, what you make of that. I mean, in your own discernment process, which you're kind of, you know, laying out for us here, was that a factor? Was it something that was a difficult decision for you to make, or did it seem quite obvious?
It seems quite obvious to me. Now, you have to factor into that. I'm also the head of the Pro-Life Center at the University of St. Thomas Law School.
Right.
So I am in litigation. In February, I testified in front of Congress on a bill supported by 43 senators, and the House version had 216 Democrat Congress members that would virtually eliminate every state limitation on abortion. Okay. So because of, I live in the liberal world, as an academician, I am in conversation with people. The other, I think, real problem, and I know you're a part of the media as well as the catechesis, figuring out what the real facts are is really, really hard. And most people, to sort of figure out, you know, well, what really are the policies of the president? We know what he said. And frankly, there are many times I just you know, but then I look at his policies. I look at the outcome. I look at the judges he's appointed. I look at the fact that we have breathing space, at least to some degree, for religious liberty. Notwithstanding, the U.S. Supreme Court said casinos are more important than churches in Nevada. Really? It wasn't hard for me, but I understand that it is hard for lots of people who are very smart, of goodwill. But I think a large part of it is it's just so dang hard to find out the facts.
It's probably safe to say that if Trump wins in 2020 for a second term, that he will likely not have won the popular vote. And I don't want to get into a whole debate about the Electoral College, but I know that you're a lawyer, and so you might have something interesting to say about this. You know, how do we factor that in, that we live in a country that perhaps, you know, doesn't reflect the will of the majority of people as they're represented in the houses of power? Do you have any insight on that? Because I know Catholics are very strong defenders and proponents of the basic principles of democracy. I'm just wondering what you make of that, of living in this country where, you know, most people probably don't agree with you. As
some people say, at one level, all politics is local. Right. And one of the most brilliant aspects of the political structure created by the Constitution was the concept of federalism. And that in many ways, only those questions that can't be adequately resolved at the state level should be the concern of the federal government. And so we have this concept of limited government. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court, through its jurisprudence, has basically done away with that. And we have the growth with FDR of the national bureaucracy and the use of the administrative state. And so I think what we're seeing is that people are increasingly unable to collectively govern their lives at the local and state level because the federal government pushes a particular agenda on those people. For example, Obergefell, where you had, you know, the majority, a substantial majority of states had reaffirmed the legal definition of marriage. most of which also had an alternative legal status providing for economic benefits and the economic interdependence of other types of relationships. But the Supreme Court just blew that up and said, no, the Constitution requires you all to accept the liberal point of view. So I would push back on your predicate facts. I don't think that it reflects this sort of large consensus. I think what it in fact reflects is the growth of federal dictates regarding issues that can be and should be governed at the state and local level, which is the principle of subsidiarity, which is also a key principle and tenet in Catholic political.
Teresa, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today and for writing your article at America. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching Behind the Story. For more videos like this, please subscribe to America's YouTube channel. There's a link to Teresa's article in the description below. It was part of a whole series of articles on the election, including some alternative views on the candidates, and all of it can be found at americamagazine.org right now. For America Media, I'm Sebastian Gomes. We'll see you again soon.